Okay. My good friend from Arizona, Andy Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's pretty weak sauce when you come in and ask a federal official to comment on a state law that's not even been passed yet. I thought that was interesting, and this faux compassion by my colleague across the aisle. That's really what it is. It's faux compassion. Director Marcos, thanks for being with us today. I also want to thank you for your January 10th response to my letter on this very topic. In the response, you indicate that the Office of Refugee Resettlement lost contact with 42,577 sponsors of unaccompanied children since January of 2021. And then this New York Times piece that came out, published in February, reports that DHS lost contact with more than 85,000 children. And this is, I recognize that's post placement by your office, but you do make the calls because you've made, I think it was like 250,000 phone calls, somewhere in that neighborhood, to follow up. But you said in your letter to me, we can't make people answer the phones. I get that, but it's a woeful process that once we've placed these children, and I think on the front end we've got, contrary to your testimony, I think there's a lot of holes in the vetting process that you've indicated to us today, and then we lose track of them. I also want to point out something with regard to UACs. The majority are boys. 2/3 of all UACs are boys. 72% are between the age of 15 and 18. Is that accurate information?
What was the last percentage?
72% of all UACs are between the age of 15 and 18.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, but when we talk about this, when we think about it, we typically focus on babies, toddlers, preteens, and that's about 15%. But the reality is the vast majority are in that critical age of 15 to 18. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask unanimous consent to enter the following into the record. February 25th, New York Times piece, April 17th, 2023. New York Times piece, my October 24th, 2022 letter to ORR, Director Marcos' January 10th response, my September 10th, 2021 letter to HHS, and ORR's February 24th, 2022 response.
Without objection, so ordered.
Yeah. So I think you're telling us that you don't disagree with the 85,000 number of children that we lost contact with. I'm not saying you lost them. You said we lost contact with them. We don't know where those kids are. Is that fair to say?
We attempt to make a safety and well-being.
I understand that. Let's get to the point here. Let's just answer the direct question. When you made the call, you didn't get a response. Your letter tells me that you usually make 3 calls. You got no response in any of those 3 calls in 85,000 kids. Is that right?
In 81% of the calls, we are.
You lost 80. You didn't have contact with more than 85,000 kids. Is that fair to say? Is that right? I mean, just yes or no. We're not saying, oh, what's your percentage? 85,000 children that were placed by you. You made calls to check on them, and you made 3 calls on average. 85,000 of them. You have no idea where they are. You don't want to answer the question. That's fine. We're going to go on to a different topic then. And so let's talk about a person by the name of Linda Brandmiller, whistleblower. She pointed out that there was individuals, children that she didn't think were placed appropriately, inadequate vetting, and so she raised it. She said one sponsor said he was going to employ these 3 boys at a construction company. Another said he lived in Florida. One sponsored 2 children who would have to work off the cost of bringing them north. She contacted supervisors. She says it's urgent. Within days, the children are released to those sponsors, and not too very long after that, she's fired. Are you familiar with that case?
Congressman, I read it in the New York Times.
Other than that, you're not personally familiar with it?
No, I joined ORR in September of 22.
Okay. In the additional article, they mentioned 5 additional whistleblowers who are also terminated for raising red flags with regard to placement of children. Are you familiar with any of those cases? Have you looked into any of those cases? That article was a couple months old.
Congressman, I believe that many of,
Are you familiar with those cases? Did you look in, let me just rephrase it. Did you look into the New York Times, the whistleblowers that were listed in the New York Times? Did you look into any of their cases as they were terminated after raising issues?
Congressman, that article just came out. We have a team looking into it.
The Brand Miller was the recent case. The first New York Times article, which is more than a month old now, that's the one that mentioned.
There are protections for whistleblowers, so I wouldn't necessarily know about specific cases. It may be.
Did you bother to even look into, what I'm suggesting is, did you bother to even look into these? It sounds like you didn't. So let me ask you this question. Matt Haygood, a Senior Director of Children's Services at the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, one of the largest of organizations, sent an email with the subject line, trafficking concerns. And he talked about trafficking, but he said there was no follow-up there. How, are you working to make corrections when you get tipped off that there are people that are trafficking in these children?
Absolutely. When a concern is raised to our office, we are following up on it. I cannot speak to what happened before I came, and I cannot speak to during the border backup. What I can tell you is today's ORR, we are hearing, we're listening, we're making sure sponsors and children have more information. They know how to get help.
Last question I'll ask you. UACs under TVPRA, if they're from Mexico and Canada, they're returned home immediately. Do you think that's a policy that should be enforced from all countries, to return them to their families?
Congressman, ORR is not a law enforcement agency or an immigration enforcement agency, and that's outside of my jurisdiction as ORR director.
So you don't want to opine on that? Is that what you're saying?
My mandate is to care for the
You don't want to opine on that? Is that right?
My mission as ORR director is to care.
So I guess the answer is you don't want to opine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.